But he was a local hero. Do you know he served 3 terms as mayor of Warsaw after the martyrdom?
Wow.
Welcome to Gospel Tangents, the best source for Mormon history, science, and theology. I'm Rick Bennett. Warsaw, Illinois, and Nauvoo, Illinois, both experienced a bit of an economic rivalry. Or was it political? Or was it religious? In our next conversation with author Brian Stutzman, he'll answer that question, or is it all 3? Check out our conversation.
Let's talk about the tensions. So the Latter-day Saints come up, and they come to Quincy, and Joseph Smith eventually joins them. They come up, and they're settling. And as they come up, people in Warsaw are saying, why don't you stop here? See, in 1837, there was this national depression. Half the financial institutions in the United States collapsed, including our own Kirtland Safety Society. And there's these developers that have all this land, and they say, come settle here so I don't go bankrupt. I need to sell my land. And there were people in Warsaw that said the same thing, and Joseph Smith and some of the other leaders, Isaac Barrow, some of these guys said, we're making this deal with Isaac Gallen, and we're going to settle up here. And there was some good interactions between the 2 towns. For instance, Warsaw had in their charter an option to have a college, a university in Warsaw. And they didn't know quite how to set it up. So John C. Bennett, the mayor of Nauvoo, comes down and helps them set up their college. Well, the college never got off the ground. And today, the northeast corner of Warsaw is called College Hill. And if you go there and ask the people, why is this called College Hill? They have no idea. Well, a Mormon came and helped you set this up.
Oh, wow.
But it was never established.
Now, I was going to ask you a quick question about the rapids there. So you said that Warsaw was the northernmost port.
The southern port.
Yeah, it was on the southern side, but it was, yeah. So when they offloaded the goods to get around the rapids, was it Nauvoo where they went back
close to Nauvoo?
It was close. It wasn't Nauvoo though.
No, it was below Nauvoo, but it was 12 miles.
Oh, I was wondering if there was a little commerce link there between for the.
Well, that
rapids.
became very a part of the tensions that happened. The people in Warsaw could see that this would be very profitable if there was a railroad. They applied and got a state authorization to have the Des Moines Rapids Railroad. This is in 40, 41, 42, and a guy named William Grover was really the spearhead behind it. William Grover later stood trial, was one of the 5 that stood trial. But he went up
for the martyrdom.
For the martyrdom.
Okay.
So William Grover, he actually publishes a business plan in the Warsaw newspaper. He says, if we had so much track and we started just north of Warsaw and we built this railroad and we offloaded it just south of Nauvoo, it would cost this much and we'd have 3 steam locomotives, and he had the payback and all the prices they charged per ton, and all they needed was money to get it done. And so they went up, several people went up to the church in Nauvoo, and they didn't have any money. And they tried to do it on the south side. They advertised in the Warsaw Signal. One of the first articles that Thomas Sharp really wrote about this, he's pleading, he says, this could be the most profitable railroad in the United States if we could just get investors. But again, the country's coming out of a depression. There's not a lot of extra cash. And eventually the rapids were tamed, and they didn't need a railroad for that. That happened in 1877, and it caused the decline of Warsaw, and we'll get to that near the end, hopefully.
Okay.
So you've got some good interactions. When they wanted to set up a Masonic lodge in Warsaw, they called on their Masonic friends in Nauvoo, and the dignitaries that came down to help set them up were people from Nauvoo. So there were some positive interactions, but without a doubt, there were some tensions, okay? And people have speculated what were the causes. Why did Warsaw become the hotbed? Now, not everybody in Warsaw at the time was necessarily anti-Mormon. In fact, the postmaster was a member of the church, Bedall, and there were other people who were friendly toward the church there. But people point to the political differences, okay? First of all, the Nauvoo Charter was very liberal, as you might know. And it wasn't uncommon, but it allowed for the saints to have their own court system, their own militia, and a university. But it was a court system because they had the right of what was called habeas corpus. A judge could come and see charges and decide whether they were valid enough to have a court hearing about it. And so it really frustrated the enemies of Joseph Smith, because that's how they harassed Joseph. They would file lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit when they were in Missouri and even in Ohio. Now the Nauvoo court would look at it and say, that's bogus, and Joseph don't even have to come to court for this. So there were some political tensions that way, but also the fact that you could vote after 6 months of being in the States, even if you were an immigrant, okay? And so all of a sudden you had block voting going on. And the people of Warsaw said, we'll never elect anybody with 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 LDS people up here, and we're at 400, 500 down here.
Yeah, because Nauvoo was really large.
It got really quick, really fast, and those people could vote. And if Joseph Smith came out for a candidate, they're going to win, at least locally.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You had some economic issues as well. Okay, people tended to trade amongst themselves. In 1842, I believe it was, Thomas Sharp wrote in his paper, he says, it's funny that the Latter-day Saints, I'm paraphrasing, up in Nauvoo, don't trade with us. We don't have anything. You won't find anything made in Nauvoo and Warsaw. You won't find it. And he says, we're probably better off because of it. So as a joke. So economics also played a part in the expansion of the church. Okay. Joseph set up what was called the hub and spoke idea of settlements. Nauvoo was going to be the hub, and then they'd have settlements. And we did it in Utah with Salt Lake and all the little communities. Okay, so Nauvoo is going to be the center, and Montrose, which became Zarahemla, and some of these other towns. Well, they were looking to put a Mormon settlement in Warsaw, just south of Warsaw. Warsaw, as communities were set up, they would divide up the town, and they would always have a section for the school, for school money, not necessarily to build the school. So in Warsaw, the 16th section was sectioned off to be school money. They were either going to sell the land to a developer and take that money and pay for public education, or they would rent that land and take the yearly rent and pay for public education. This was kind of near the river. And there's some people that came up to the Saints and said, hey, would you like to settle here? So Joseph Smith comes to Warsaw. Later on, Brigham Young and his cousin Willard Richards, most people don't realize they were first cousins.
Oh, I didn't know that, yeah.
And Willard Richards were first cousins, and they scoped out the 16th section, and they decided to name it Warren. And I don't know why, but I speculate that it's because of an attorney named Calvin Warren. Calvin Warren represented Joseph a couple times. Later on, he's the defense attorney for the 5 that stood trial. So they have this town named Warren. And they're checking it out. Willard Richards comes and he moves into this hotel in Warsaw called the Warsaw House. And we'll learn later on that that's where the mob met after the martyrdom. So Willard Richards lives there for about 2 months and gets the Saints ready to go. And Thomas Sharp's kind of livid. When Joseph Smith comes down, he says in his newspaper, well, essentially he says the deed's been done. The verdict, the edict's gone out. We're going to have a Mormon settlement on our borders. He wasn't too happy. He was kind of pithy. So in fall of November of 41, 204 Saints come up the Mississippi River on a ship called the Osprey, and they were led by Joseph Fielding, and they were settling in Warsaw, in this town of Warren. Okay. Now, Willard Richards had won a seat on the Nauvoo City Council, so he'd gone back to Nauvoo. So they're settling in Warren, Illinois, just on the border of Warsaw. And it becomes really hostile. They were told that they can't cut down the trees for lumber, they can't make houses, they can't, the prices of milling at the mill right next to them doubled. The prices at the pier for lumber, the prices for lumber being bought dropped. They were economically destitute. And there's a building still in Warsaw, 200 block of Main. It's an old brick building. It was called the Warren Hotel. And the story is that if you came there in November, December of 841 with a strong British accent, the price of everything went way up, doubled, tripled, because they figured you were one of those Mormons from England in Joseph Fielding's party. And so it was very hostile. And so they got there and said, we can't make this worse. So they retreat back to Nauvoo. Almost all 240. There's a couple that stayed around. 200 Saints come to Nauvoo. Well, all of a sudden, these land speculators, including Calvin Warren, Mark Aldridge, 2 that stood trial. Well, Mark Aldridge did. Warren was the attorney. They come up to Joseph Smith in December, near the December 30th, December 31st, and they plead with him and said, Joseph, we were kind of mean to your settlers here, but we need them. We have to sell this land. We need them here in Warren. And they talk for 2 days, and Joseph declines. And New Year's Eve, 1841, December 31st, in the evening, one of them comes to Joseph and said, please reconsider. And Joseph gives a prophecy, and it's in the history of the church about Warsaw. And he basically says that Warsaw won't be built up until it's knocked down. And I explain in my book about the context of the prophecy and what it was talking about, but it's a really cool prophecy. Well, Joseph said no, and Calvin Warren and Mark Aldridge declared bankruptcy a few months later because they couldn't sell this land. Now again, these two guys that declared bankruptcy because Joseph Smith and the saints would not buy their land. One becomes a defendant in the trial, the other one's the attorney for the trial. So did they have cause to be mad at Joseph Smith? Okay. So we talked about political, economic, and religious. Let's talk about religious tensions. The people in Warsaw mixed, but there were people in Warsaw and the enemies of the church that disliked the Latter-day Saints, but they really, really, really disliked Joseph Smith for one reason or another. And to me, in my research, I think some of it's jealousy. They targeted Joseph Smith more than just the church. They wrote about Joseph Smith. Thomas Sharp became a stalker of Joseph Smith in his paper. So not everybody in Warsaw, but they targeted him, and there was John Hollis wrote a book called Cultures in Conflict, and they talked about the culture of the Latter-day Saints, mostly New England, and they believed in a little bit more in federalism. If local things didn't go right, you could go up the food chain to the federal government. And that's when, after the Saints were kicked out of Missouri, Joseph went to the President of the United States for relief. The locals had more of a Jacksonian type mentality. The problems were solved locally, and the federal government didn't have any business locally. And so there was kind of a conflict that way. And so the local people were really kind of amazed. They're jealous of Joseph Smith for a couple of reasons. One is that Joseph was not only a religious leader, but a political leader. And some of the people thought that was wrong. Some of the non-Mormons in Warsaw and surrounding, they thought it should be separate. Now the Saints, after being kicked around by non-Latter-day Saint elected leaders, they had a lot of solace knowing that their government, their local government's controlled by people that they could trust. Okay, so the Saints in Nauvoo basically were happy and pleased with having government leaders that were also church leaders, but the outside world didn't see that as I don't know, safe or good or whatever you might say. Now, also you got to remember what it would be like on the frontier. This is very much the frontier in the 1840s, and you're farming or you're a blacksmith or whatever, and you see dozens, hundreds, thousands of people pass by your farm to go see the new Mormon prophet. After a while, people got really jealous of him. He's just a guy. He's nothing special. Why is everybody coming to see him? Why are people traveling from thousands of miles away to come be part of his kingdom on the Mississippi? There was a lot of personal jealousy about Joseph Smith.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with author Brian Stutzman. In our next conversation, we'll talk about the laying of the Nauvoo Temple cornerstone. There was an interesting guest on hand.
But when they set the cornerstone for the Nauvoo Temple in April 6 of 1841, Joseph Smith had a table up front for the dignitaries, and some of the dignitaries, one of them was Chief Keokuk from Iowa, who the town is named after, and he was up at the front table, and he invited young Thomas Sharp, again 22, 23 years old, to be up at the head table with him, and they had this big feast and a military parade, and they set the cornerstone for the Nauvoo Temple.
So at this time, Thomas is still friendly.
Yeah, neutral at best, neutral or friendly.
If you'd like to hear the entire interview uncut, please support Gospel Tangents and become a subscriber. For just $5 a month, go to patreon.com/gospeltangents, and you can hear the entire interview. And you can also get transcripts available at either our Amazon website, or if you want to give the money to me and not Amazon, please subscribe on my website at gospeltangents.com, and you can click the yellow subscribe button. Of course, we're also on Facebook, Twitter, and all the other places. Make sure you subscribe on iTunes at tinyurl.com/gospeltangents. And don't forget to click here to subscribe on YouTube, here for a transcript, and over here we've got some more of our great videos. Thanks again for listening.